Welcome to Kitchen Talk, a space where we can have open and honest conversations, just like you'd have with your friend at the kitchen table. Some of the things we talk about may be a little tough, maybe a little challenging, but that doesn't mean we have to shy away from them. By listening to these stories and listening to the people that share them, there's a lot to learn from that. And there's a lot of spaces we can go with that and things we can do with this information and possibilities that can happen too. Today, I'm really thankful that we get to talk with Eric Weissman, and he's going to be sharing his personal and professional experience when it comes to homelessness, addictions, and housing securities. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Eric.
My name's Eric Weissman. I'm a professor of sociology at UMBSJ. 26 years ago, I entered recovery from very serious addictions. I had mental health issues, and I'd been homeless off and on for about 7 years. So since about 1997, I've been doing research, making short video documentaries about homelessness, mental health, addictions, and housing in different cities in Canada and the United States. And here at the University of New Brunswick, I do a lot of research about housing policy, and I focus a lot on tiny homes and alternative types of housing. I'm from Toronto, so I lived there for 50 some odd years. And then I did 5 years in Montreal for my PhD. And then I did research while I was in Montreal in Portland, Oregon, which has some of the first legally sanctioned tiny home villages. So I went and actually lived in one for a short period of time. And I found that the stories of the individuals that I was meeting, regardless of the size of the city or where the city was, were interchangeable. So one of the things that I've noticed in Canadian, especially smaller, older resource towns, is that the homelessness is very strongly correlated with addictions. Now, I don't know if that's a result of homelessness or a cause of homelessness. In the big cities, I would say that it's not legitimate to say that it's a cause, but it's strongly associated. So, you know, we have the right to housing in Canada now. It's a bill. And I'm really concerned about it, because even though it's difficult to enforce and nobody really knows how to make it happen, it's still considered, at least Canadians are now on board with the idea that housing is a basic right. And as a basic right, governments have to fall in line. And since provinces have to put their practices in line with the tenets and the spirit of that bill. So I don't think that's being done here, and to me, it's a bit of an issue.
When it comes to substance abuse, you had mentioned how correlation, causation, they just seem to happen together with homelessness.
People see that.
Yes.
So it really depends on, people want to construct these arguments about deserving and undeserving character. And so when you see people who are literally on the streets, who are self-medicating or might be wasted, and they fail to understand that survival anxiety produces that, and sleep deprivation, number one, produces those needs. So even if you're not using, going through survival anxiety and sleep deprivation will produce conditions, mental health conditions, delusions, all kinds of physical conditions, and since there's no access to medication, you do things to make you feel good, and eventually you may start using. So every street that I've worked on, in every city that I've been in, and every community that I've studied, there are people who didn't do drugs until they entered homelessness. Mental health issues have nothing to do with whether you're homeless or not. Even students have them. So I'm not sure why people are fixated on that. And I think, but I have a theory, and the reason is they want to decide who to give help to. And so people on the very right of center or on the center don't really want to help people who aren't going to help themselves. So my argument has shifted, especially since I've done work all over North America now in different places, that, a lot of people are becoming addicts who demographically wouldn't have become addicts before. So we need to do something to protect our societies, protect our children, protect our friends and neighbors. There's something going on that isn't about their nature. It's about the nature of the world we're living in that's producing the need for people to medicate. You need new building, you need new blood, you need new energy. The economy needs to boom, but it can't happen at the expense of people who live here. And people seem to forget that we have this thing called place attachment, right? So when people are living in their small, tiny homes, some people, again, on that right of whatever spectrum, can't understand how people can attach to a place like that.
So now we've got an added bonus?
Yeah, my rescue carbon, who came from Texas in October.
Oh.
has been handed off to me by the great and wonderful Claire. Thank you, Claire. One of the arguments for tiny home communities, and one of the reasons why I've argued for them for about 15 years, 20 years, is that most shelters don't allow couples. They're starting to. And a lot of the lessons that we're learning for shelters today came from the experiences of these alternative spaces. So couples, gay couples, trans people are very often victims within the conservative or the traditional shelter system. So a lot of these new spaces afford a place for people to stay and to stay with their pets who normally wouldn't have that opportunity. The only thing that's getting in the way are the arguments between people who are planning these solutions. But the basic materials, the basic spaces, the stock is here, at least the way I see it. And so to me, this again is that paradox. You have the possibility of the solution, but then you have these other needs getting in the way of it. So sure, gentrify, develop, build condos, but at the same time, build housing that people can afford and introduce rent controls. And you'll find that these major issues with homelessness in particular will be resolved sooner than later.
And that's where, like, I'm so thankful to hear you talk about, like, your experiences with addictions and homelessness firsthand. And that's something where I find, for myself, having lived here, I've moved here 20 years ago. And it's only been in the last 2 years that I've started talking about my own histories of homelessness and drug addictions, because it's still a lot of people don't talk about this stuff here.
So we all have these narratives that we were socialized with about how the world's supposed to go, what homelessness is supposed to mean, what housing is supposed to look like. But then if we're really honest with ourselves about our own foibles and our own mistakes, if we have some humility, we can change our expectations for others.
Well, and I find for myself, St. John, like, it still surprises me how, like, we've got homes in various states of repair, and we do have people living in 20,000 square foot homes, and people with no homes, sometimes right next door, literally.
People often say that New Brunswick is one of the poorest provinces. I don't think that it's necessarily true. Like, if you were to look at the amount of wealth in New Brunswick, it's not that there isn't wealth. It's just that the scale of inequality is most dramatic here than any other place I've lived in.
I find that too, and it's so refreshing to hear you say
that
as well.
I don't know what the numbers are, but one of the first things I'm going to do when we get back to school is start looking at those numbers, because especially because I live in Rossi now.
Yes.
I see this corridor of wealth.
Yes.
So I do understand that St. John in itself, because I told you about this research we're doing.
Yes.
St. John has very high levels of poverty, especially child age poverty and generational poverty, and New Brunswick is not as wealthy as some of the other provinces, but it's the most dramatic manifestation of that is the scale of inequality, the difference between the haves and the have-nots. It's profound and very visible. Because somebody's homeless or they're an addict does not make them not a people. They don't become non-persons. In fact, if anything, they become more valuable persons. They're an opportunity for us to help, right? So.
And I know, like, just thinking about, like, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, like, not everyone starts off with the same, like, I think of it like the same deck of cards or the same hand that you're dealt. Like, some people get dealt pretty rough hand.
Well, so I mentioned Dr. Woodhull Melnick and myself and a lot of other people who do the work that we do. That's why we do the work we do. We want people to understand that it's pulling yourself up from the bootstraps is a safe narrative that people have, that sort of, what's the word? It makes them free of any responsibility to help others. But the research that we do shows that it's far more entrenched in our social structures and inequality. And, so it is actually our responsibility. Our job as social scientists is to produce facts from different perspectives so that people can change their ideas and they can see the value and the humanity, the moral, ethical, and scientific call to change the way things have been done, because it's not working. In March of 1995, I was lying about to be evicted from my welfare supported studio in Toronto. I owed all these drug dealers money, and it's crazy because I'd been at the apex of that community at one point, and here I was lying. I owned a futon that I found on the street, nothing else. And I owed so many people money, and my only calories were coming from the 40 to 60 ounces of booze I was drinking every day. And I had Coke, that's it. Coke and booze, that's it. And I had given up. And they talk about reaching this place of absolute helplessness, and I was there. I left my door open knowing that these dealers were looking for me, hoping they would come and find me. And I'm not making this up to sound Hollywoodish. It's not. This is true. And then one day it happened, and I heard the footsteps, and I didn't even turn my head. I was looking out the window, clear as a bell. It was cold. There was a bird on the windowsill. And I heard the footsteps, and they were a woman's heel. And so I turned my head around, and it was my older sister, Andrea. And she'd been looking for me for 3 months. And she found me, and she looked down, and she was crying, and her tear fell on my cheek. And the other one fell, you know, the old varnished floors in these lofts? Hit the floor and exploded. And she, I'm telling you, as she said that, as that happened, she said, "You need help." And she'd said it many times. And I said, "You know what? You're right. I have no idea, but that is the moment that changed my life." So she got me to a doctor. Doctor got me to rehab, treatment and rehab. I didn't have to wait. It didn't take the first time. It didn't take the first time. So I called him and said, "I'm in a relapse." He goes, "Good, we'll book you an appointment for 2 months from now." And he got me in. Now, if you don't live in a world where that's possible, you cannot ask people to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. That's my final opinion.
I am so thankful for Eric for sharing his personal experiences and how those have shaped his professional life. I think there's a lot of strength that comes with sharing stories, and I feel a lot better with not hiding things from my past and seeing those struggles and seeing those things that I've encountered and struggled with and thankfully overcome. And that I shouldn't be ashamed of that, and I shouldn't hide away from it. And by leaning into it and understanding it and then sharing it with other folks is such a powerful thing.